realize that the Constitution limits land ownership by the federal government to 10 miles square, that is Washington, D.C., and other places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. But the new government acquired new lands that were not within the existing states, the Louisiana Purchase and the Oregon, California, and Texas territories. From the beginning, these lands were held by the government only until they could be owned and settled by private citizens. John Adams summed up the common view of private property when he said, "The moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence." The Oklahoma land rush is an example of how the federal government tried to get this new land into the hands of private owners. The Homestead Act and other legislation gave the land to settlers and in some cases sold the land for as little as $1 an acre. Robert Marshall and Benton McKay, both avowed socialists, founded the Wilderness Society in 1930. Marshall's book, The People's Forests, advocated seizure of all forests by the federal government. Marshall became Roosevelt's U.S. Forest Service director, and Benton McKay worked for the TVA in the creation of the Appalachian Trail. The socialists won, and the government stopped distributing land to private citizens. The goal of the environmental community, and many in government, is to have government own or control all the land, and return at least half of the land to wilderness.
This is 1,140 pages that explains how to implement the 16-page treaty on biodiversity. Page 993 sums it all up by saying, the recently published Wildlands Project in the United States is the central theme of protected areas.
For more than a generation, environmental organizations have lobbied governments to convert more and more federal land to wilderness and to add more land to the government inventory. Even though the 1992 Convention on Biological Diversity was not ratified, the pace of conversion has increased dramatically as private land is being taken for historic and heritage areas, for scenic byways, for scenic rivers, for national monuments, for parks and open space, for wetland mitigation and critical habitat and conservation easements, for wildlife refuges, wilderness corridors, buffer zones, and for view sheds. People are to live in islands of human habitat, or villages which are called sustainable communities. State Representative Joe Neal explains what's happening in South Carolina and all across the nation.
What this plan does, very simply, is to lay out a vision of this area that includes the evolution or creation of villages. They want to force all growth in this area into villages, high density, high population villages. Around these villages will be drawn what are called urban boundary zones. These urban boundary zones will delineate the village from the surrounding countryside. And those two entities, the village and the countryside, will be treated differently by this legislation. Property that is not in the village will find that its value is lessened, reduced, or eliminated. Property within the village will find that that property will gain or rise in value because that's the only place where development will be allowed to occur.